Absolutely. If 1,000 Israelis were dead, thousands wounded, and about one-third of those casualties being children, we would not see the kind of trivialization and business as usual that we're seeing in the West today. In fact, it could even be that President-elect Obama would either actually incorporate it into his inauguration speech, or I could even envision him postponing the inauguration. I mean, that's the extent of the worldwide outcry when a master race is being victimized. But when you have these individuals in Palestine who are on the receiving end of the violence of the master race, then, of course, it's barely a blip on the screen, except that, the exception being that we are in this Internet age where independent media is really, and you're an example of it, is really on the ball here, and that does make a difference. But it's going to be a long haul, and it's going to mean that we have to do more than sit in front of our computers. I think that the British have been way ahead of us in that they've gotten out into the streets and they've had massive protests. But also it involves everything: diplomacy, edutainment, entertainment, communication, the universities, everything. And also, can it ever be that the Israelis would be dragged in front of the European war crimes courts the way the Serbs were? Or can it ever be that there would be an ironclad boycott and divestment such as was targeted against the whites of South Africa? Without really tough measures like that, I really believe that the Israelis relish and revel in this kind of defiance of the world. Once again, as you pointed out, there is this mentality.
Hold on, Michael. We'll pick that up in just a minute. Okay, talking with Michael Hoffman. Michael, you were just starting to say we had to take a break. As you said, as you pointed out, as you were pointing out, do you remember where you were on that?
Well, I'm talking about this mentality of paranoia and anticipatory violence where they anticipate the reaction of their enemies, and also the warrant for genocide on our website, Jeff, at www.revisionisthistory.org. We have a statement from the Jerusalem Post from the former Sephardic chief rabbi Mordecai Elihu, and I quote, "All civilians living in Gaza are collectively guilty for Qassam attacks on Sderot," says the former chief rabbi. And his son, Shmuel Elihu, who is chief rabbi of Safed, said his father advocated carpet bombing the general area from which the rockets were launched, regardless of the price in Palestinian life, end quote. So this is the equivalent of a fatwa. We hear so much about a fatwa being issued by some imam to commit some atrocity against the West. What about these religious dictates that are given to the Orthodox soldiers in the Israeli army and those in the political arena who are interested in garnering favor with these very powerful rabbis? What about the effects of this in terms of how the Israelis wage the war that they're waging against the Palestinians? Completely policed out of analysis of Israel's war, counterfeit Israel's war on Gaza.
Wow. It summed up perfectly. By the way, if you folks still haven't gotten onto it, just watch your mainstream media apologize for Israel and underestimate, underrate, and downright obfuscate the reality of the slaughter that's going on there. This is beyond hideous. The number one story in the Google News page right now, Apple computer well-positioned to race forward while Steve Jobs sidelined. Hey, this is the number one story. Okay, there you go. What we have here is an event going on that is unfolding that probably will not lead to any kind of definitive victory for either side, but in a de facto sense, the Palestinians have already won. In the World Court of Public Opinion, the Jews the Zionist Jews, the Israeli Jews. Some would call them the Zionist Nazi Jews because of their tactics, which were identical to the World War II alleged tactics of Germany and its allies, is already on the books. It's there. It's quite an interesting thing to see happen, in a way. And thanks for the Internet, because without it, we would have really no idea of what's going on there. They would be able to bring the lid down on this completely.
Yes, and the future is really very bad for the Israelis and the Zionists. They have to be out of their mind to pursue this against not just 1.5 million people in Gaza, but the Palestinians in the West Bank, the Palestinians who live in the Israeli state proper.
Well, they just outlawed 2 Arab parties in Israel. They won't let them participate in the system. I mean, this is probably the world's most racist country, without question. And yet it gets away with being portrayed as some kind of a democratic friend of the United States. I mean, it's a joke.
The only democracy in the Middle East, and it also has built into it from its very founding a special supreme place for those of Jewish descent, and also in the courts, the religious courts and the courts which govern the daily life of the people, and conversions are in the hands of the Orthodox rabbinate, and that's something that David Ben-Gurion stipulated at the very founding of the Israeli state. So the notion that they have a separation of church and state or some type of Jeffersonian ideals of democracy is risible. There's no question about it. But ultimately, if there are any cooler heads over there, I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's decent people over there.
They're demonstrating, some of them, yeah.
But some of them are, yes. And they would realize that it's not a two-state solution. It's going to have to be a one-state solution. And
that's totally right.
And this exceptionalism where there's one country in the world that's actually able to have racial and religious supremacy, they're going to have to forfeit that. And if they won't, and most likely they will not because the fanatics are in control, short of a miracle of God, we're going to see relentless bloodshed, which could lead us to a nuclear war. It could lead us to all kinds of terrorism directed against the American people.
Yeah.
It's really a mess. And also, we're also seeing a hardening of the lines of resistance in terms of the Palestinian people who historically have been both Christian and Muslim, but a very moderate, a much larger Christian population than at present, because many of them have grown discouraged at the so-called Judeo-Christians who have basically sided with the Zionists rather than Christians. Right. And then you also had a very moderate, among the most moderate in the entire Arab world, Muslims, who were very secular-oriented, very fond of the United States.
Oh, they were westernized,
Pardon me?
They were westernized, very much so.
Yes, very advanced, and we have radicalized all these people. I think the radicalization process is deliberate because both the Israelis and the American cryptocracy do not want a partner for peace.
No, and they need the rockets, too. Let's not forget that for a minute.
They need the rockets, and they need the Temple Mount, which is the great dream of the Masonic lodges, to seize control of the Haram al-Sharif and reestablish the Third Temple. All of this is part of an apocalyptic scenario which is outside of Islam. It's not being caused by Islam. It's being caused by these extra Islamic factors which are manipulating these people. It's a grotesque, blood-drenched scenario, Jeff.
Totally agree. Michael Hoffman, my guest, his book, it's an astonishing achievement, Judaism Discovered from Its Own Texts. A study of the anti-biblical religion of racism, self-worship, superstition, and deceit. It's just an amazing book, over 1,000 pages. Tells the whole story in the words of the texts themselves. Be right back with Michael. Visiting with Michael Hoffman and talking about current issues, his book as a backdrop, not only for this issue, but for all issues in the future and the past. This is the definitive book. Nothing will ever be published, in my opinion, that can touch it. Judaism discovered from its own texts. Its own texts. Crucially important to understand that. Associated Press continues to apologize for Israel. It's an obscenity. There's a story in the Telegraph in the UK showing Bibi Netanyahu saying Hamas must be removed from Gaza.